So this is on what we started introducing last, I think yesterday. I went through restructuring and focused on an issue of financial restructuring. Remember, I talked about financial restructuring, or rather financial reconstruction, where I said that it's a form of restructuring through capital reorganization. I said financial reconstruction is a way of restructuring through capital reorganization, and we said that can take various forms, like conversion of debt from one form to another, conversion of debt to equity, or equity from one form to another, and so forth and so on. Then I went further to say that financial reconstruction can have an effect on the share price, and it can also have an effect on the weighted average cost of capital of the firm. And I went further to say that for us to be able to analyze the impact of a financial reconstruction on share price or impact on weighted average cost of capital of the firm, then we need to look at the effect of that financial reconstruction, one, on growth rate. That means you need to establish the growth rate before and after the financial reconstruction, the effect on systematic risk. We need to work out the beta coefficient of equity before and after the financial reconstruction, the beta coefficient of a levered firm, the beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm before and after the financial reconstruction, then establish share price before and after the financial reconstruction. That share price, more often than not, shall be determined using the dividend growth model. I think I made this discussion yesterday, and I said that for purposes of establishing the beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm before and after the financial reconstruction, we need to use the Hamada model. I talked about Hamada model. I gave you the Hamada model, a model by a scholar by the name Robert Hamada. There's a scholar in finance referred to as Robert Hamada. The guy came up with a model that is connected, that is used with the capital asset price model. Every time you bring in the Hamada model, then you bring in the capital asset price model. Before we look at this question, which I've already shared an answer with you, perhaps it's important for me to remind you that the growth rate that you work out before and after the financial reconstruction, you take return on equity times retention ratio. Return on equity multiplied by the retention ratio. You need to work out the return on equity and work out the retention ratio and find the growth rate before and after the financial reconstruction. But I said yesterday that where it's not possible to determine return on equity, or where it's not given, it's assumed that is equal to cost of equity. The cost of equity of a levered firm, which should be worked out using CAPM, a risk-free rate plus beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm, expected return of the market portfolio minus risk-free rate. In the absence of information to get return on equity, then it's assumed that return on equity is equal to the cost of equity. We assume that the return on equity is equal to cost of equity, which cost of equity is captured using the framework of the capital asset price model. This risk-free rate, return of the market portfolio, risk-free rate, beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm, which is captured using Hamada model. Beta of equity of a levered firm is equal to beta of equity of an unlevered firm, 1 plus B over S in bracket 1 minus T. This is the Hamada model. I talked about the Hamada model. So we need to look for beta of equity of an unlevered firm given the beta of equity of an unlevered firm, or what sometimes we call asset beta. This one sometimes is referred to as the asset beta. This is debt, that is equity, or debt proportion, equity proportion. And this is what affects capital structure, the ratio of debt to equity. B over E is the ratio of debt to equity. Debt and equity are components of the firm's capital structure. Remember, according to Robert Hamada, a relationship exists between capital structure and systematic risk. According to Robert Hamada, there's a relationship between capital structure and systematic risk. The higher the amount of debt in the firm's capital structure, the greater the systematic risk. The lower amount of debt in the firm's capital structure, the smaller the systematic risk. So restructuring through capital reorganization affects, of course, assuming there are only two elements in the firm's capital structure, that is debt and equity. Then restructuring through capital reorganization will affect the amount of debt, will affect the amount of equity, and therefore will affect the ratio of debt to equity. B over S in this Hamada model is a ratio of debt to equity, or a proportion of debt divided by proportion of equity. So if debt is convertible into equity, or equity or debt convertible from one form to another, then that affects the proportion of debt, affect the proportion of equity in the firm's capital structure. This is what I'm calling B over Q. So you need to establish debt of equity of a levered firm before and after the financial reconstruction, the growth rate before and after the financial reconstruction, and then use the dividend growth model to find share price. P naught is equal to P naught 1 plus G over KS minus G. Of course, this is what I'm calling KEL. One determined using the capital asset price model, the cost of equity of a levered firm. Growth rate will have worked out. Dividend you can work out. So you can establish price of a share before and after the financial reconstruction. So I think this is a discussion that I had, but I did not do any illustration. That sitting in November 2018. I want one of you to read through. Before I share the answer, would one of you please read through the question slowly? November 2018. One of you can read through the question slowly. Anybody who can read through the question slowly?
Mavueni Limited
Yes,
is considering undertaking a financial reconstruction during which it would repurchase its outstanding ordinary shares using debt. This will raise its debt to equity ratio to 1.20. The following information was available for the company.
Go slow. We raise the debt to equity ratio to
1.20.
That debt to equity ratio is what I'm saying, B divided by S, raised to 1.0, 1.2.
Yes, 1.20.
Up from, okay, we'll know that. Continue.
The following information was available for the company. Existing debt to equity ratio is 0.80.
Okay, so that means after the financial reconstruction, the ratio of debt will increase from 0.8 to 1.2. So 0.8,
yes.
The ratio of debt to equity before the financial reconstruction. 1.2 is the ratio of debt to equity after the financial reconstruction. Continue.
The asset beta and geared beta of equity is 0.30.
Okay, asset beta is the one that I was calling BEU in the Hamada model. Is equal to
0.30.
Move on.
The risk-free rate of return is 8%. The return of market portfolio is 14%. The company adopts 50% payout ratio as its dividend policy. The company expects to generate earnings per share of 6 shillings.
Okay, so
Yes,
if
yes.
the okay, fine. Then just a minute there. If the payout is 50%, now I've only allowed the lady who is reading the question to unmute. I've only allowed the lady. I've only allowed the lady who's reading the question to unmute. Can you mute yourself, Buana? Or I get you out of the meeting. You know, if you disturb me, I'll get you out of the meeting. And you cannot come back. Okay, continue.
Debt finance is considered to be risk-free.
Okay, now the payout ratio is 50%. The question talks about earning per share of how much?
6 shillings.
Yeah. So that means the most recent dividend per share should be 50% of 6. If the payout ratio is 50%, it means 50% of earnings of 6 will be given out as dividend. That is 3 shillings. Did you note? Then the question says, debt is risk-free. Debt is risk-free, meaning that KD is equal to risk-free rate. The before tax cost of debt is the risk-free rate. The before tax cost of debt is the risk-free rate. Anytime you're told debt is risk-free, it implies that the before tax cost of debt is the risk-free. Continue.
The corporate tax rate is 30%. Required. Evaluate the impact of financial reconstruction on Mavueni's limited weighted average cost of capital.
Oh, its impact on weighted average cost of capital. But I think it's important before even we move to impact on weighted average cost of capital to analyze the impact on share price. To analyze the impact on share price, then from there, look at the impact on weighted average cost of capital. So we have to look at a situation before and after the financial reconstruction. Okay, now from this information that we have here, I think it's possible for us to find the share price before and after the financial reconstruction. Then work out the weighted average cost of capital of a firm before and after the financial reconstruction. If you look at this question keenly, we shall work out the share price using the dividend growth model. B naught is equal to D naught 1 plus G divided by KS L minus G, cost of equity of a levered firm. Using the dividend growth model, we can find the share price before, the value of P before the financial reconstruction, and the value of P after the financial reconstruction, and then establish the overall cost of capital. Before I share the question, the solution that already given to you, let's try to internalize the question. How possible is it to find the share price before the financial reconstruction? And how possible is it for us to find the weighted average cost of capital before the financial reconstruction using this formula? Already we know the value of D naught. The question says, the dividend payout is 50%, earning per share is 6, so dividend per share is 3. 50% of the earning per share so 50% of earning per share is dividend per share. So the value of D naught is a constant. Whether it is before the financial reconstruction or after the financial reconstruction, the value of D naught is a constant. What we need to find is KS, the cost of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction. Let me analyze before the financial reconstruction. Once we have seen what happens before the financial reconstruction, then it is possible to see what happens after the financial reconstruction. So D naught, this is 3. It does not matter whether it's before or after the financial reconstruction. The value of D does not change. We need to find cost of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction using CAPM. You can see we know the risk-free rate. We know return of the market portfolio. We know the asset beta. But remember, what we are looking for is cost of equity of a levered firm. That means we have to bring in the Amada model to find the beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm using Amada model. That is BEU in bracket 1 plus B over S 1 minus T. Remember, we are analyzing before. We are analyzing a situation before the financial reconstruction. So if we bring in the Amada model, then we can find the beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm, which is equal to asset beta, it's given here, 0.3, 1 plus B over S is the ratio of debt to equity. Before the financial reconstruction, the ratio of debt to equity ratio is 0.8. B over S is 0.8, close the bracket, 1 minus 0.3. Please take note that I'm analyzing before financial reconstruction, and we shall go through the same process after the financial reconstruction. The ratio of debt to equity before the financial reconstruction is 0.8. In the Hamada model, B over S is the ratio of debt to equity. So before the financial reconstruction, that is 0.8. So what becomes the beta of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction? This becomes 0.3, close the bracket, 1 plus 0.7 times 0.8, 0.56. 0.56 plus 1 times 0.3 should equal to what? Beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction.
0.468.
0.468.
468.
Okay. Now, this company is levered. That is why we have to look for the beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm. Now that we know the beta coefficient of equity of a levered firm, we know the risk-free rate, you know the return of the market portfolio, then now, using the capital asset pricing model, we can then work out cost of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction, risk-free rate plus BEL, return of the market portfolio, and as risk-free rates. We use the capital asset price model to find the cost of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction. Now, risk-free rate is 8 plus beta of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction, 0.468. Return of the market portfolio is 14 minus 8. That shall give us the cost of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction. That will be how much?
10.8.
10.8%. Cost of equity of a levered firm before the financial reconstruction. So this is what we have in this formula here, ladies and gentlemen. KSL, here 10.8, D naught, that is 3. Now we need to establish the growth rate. Growth rate is return on equity times retention ratio. Using the Gordon's growth approximation equation, the value of G is equal to return on equity times retention ratio. Now, please take note here. If you look at this question keenly, we have no information to look for return on equity. From your ratio analysis, you guys know that return on equity is net income over equity. Net income over equity. I don't think it's possible for us to compute return on equity. In the light of the information given in the question, we have no information to look for return on equity. But you need to confirm in an exam situation whether you have net income and whether you have equity. So net income divided by equity is return on equity. In the absence of that information to capture return on equity, the only feasible assumption for us is to assume that return on equity is equal to cost of equity of a levered farm. Return on equity is equal to the cost of equity of a levered farm. And therefore, the growth rate shall equal to, now I've already established cost of equity of a levered farm, that is 10.8%, times, we know the payout ratio, 50%. So retention ratio should be 50%. If the dividend payout is 50%, it means therefore that the retention ratio is 50%. Having assumed that return on equity is equal to cost of equity, then now we say 10.8 times 50%, which is equal to what? 5 point what?
5.4.
5.4%. Dividend growth rate. Okay, with that information now, you can see that it's possible for us to compute, price of a share before the financial reconstruction. D naught, 1 plus G divided by KSL percent minus G percent. D is 3, 1 plus G, you found 5.4%. Cost of equity of a levered farm before the financial reconstruction, we found 10.8% minus 5.4%. That should give us what share price before the financial reconstruction? Share price before the financial reconstruction? Share price before the financial reconstruction?
$58.56.
58.56 shillings. Now, let me be very clear. The question was not asking the impact on share price, but there's a possibility in an exam situation, the examiner asking you to analyze the impact on share price. So I've established the price before the financial reconstruction. I'll work out the price after financial reconstruction. But before I move to after, we need to establish the weighted average cost of capital of a levered farm before the financial reconstruction. Cost of equity of a levered farm, S over V plus KD, 1 minus T, B over V. I'm aware I've not done a topic of cost of capital. I think that's one topic that we shall be moving on to, the capital structure, and we'll be computing this cost of capital. But I know from your section 3 background, the computation of cost of capital is not a big deal. Weighted average cost of capital before the financial reconstruction of a levered farm. Cost of equity of a levered farm, we already have captured it. 10.8 using CAPM. Nafikiri umeona hiyo eh? Hii tumetafuta kutumia CAPM eh? Ndio hii tumetumia hapa juu in that formula to value that share. So cost of equity of a levered farm before the financial reconstruction, we worked out using CAPM. KD is how much? The question says that is risk-free. The question says that is what? Risk-free. And which is the risk-free rate of return?
8%.
Yeah, so KD is equal to the risk-free rate of return. Eh? That is considered to be risk-free. Therefore, KD is equal to risk-free rate of return. Eh? Now, corporation tax rate is 30%. Eh? So. Corporation tax rate, 30%. Eh? Remember, I'm analyzing this before the financial reconstruction. I've not moved to after the financial reconstruction. Now, S over V is the market value weight of equity, is the market value weight of debt. Yeah, proportion of equity and proportion of debt. Now, before the financial reconstruction, we were informed that the ratio of debt to equity is equal to what?
0.8.
Now, let me ask a question, ladies and gentlemen. Please, hapa msikize mzuri, eh? If the ratio of debt to equity is 0.8 in the company's capital structure, what do you think will be the proportion of debt and the proportion of equity in the firm's capital structure? Assuming debt was 80 million. Let me assume equity is 100 million. Let me assume if debt is 80 million, equity is 100 million. If you take 80 divided by 100, that should give you 0.8. Eh?
Yes.
Now, what proportion is the debt proportion and what proportion is the equity proportion? The capital structure,
Debt is over 180.
that proportion is equal to?
80 million over 180 million.
Correct. Very correct. So if you take 80 divided by 180, that becomes the debt proportion, which is how much? 80 divided by 180 should equal to what?
0.44.
Yeah, you need debt proportion. So equity should be the balance, huh? 0.56, eh?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yes.
Now, or someone else could have said 100 million divided by 180, which is 0.56, eh? Now, some of you could be wondering, where have I picked the figures from? 80 and 100. I've picked figures at random, which could give me 0.8, eh? Okay. Now, if you don't want to assume figures at random, then you'll say 0.8 to 1. The ratio of debt to equity is 0.8 to 1. If that is the case, then debt should be 0.8 over 1.8. Debt proportion will be 0.8 over 1.8. Equity proportion is 1 over 1.8. Hizo ratios nimeongeza tu. 0.8 plus 1 is 1.8. So debt is 0.8 over 1.8. Eh? Hiyo ni ngapi?
0.8 divided 1.8.
0.44. Naona ndio hiyo tulipata, eh? Equity takuwa 1 divided by 1.8 should be 0.56, eh? Si ndio? Yeah. Okay. Now, the weighted average cost of capital of this firm before the financial reconstruction is 10.8 times 0.56. Market value weight of equity. Debt is 8 before tax. Cost of debt 1 minus 0.3 times 0.44. That becomes the weighted average cost of capital of the firm before the financial reconstruction. Inakuwa ngapi?
8.512.
The firm's weighted average cost of capital before the financial reconstruction. Remember the impact of financial reconstruction, the impact of the financial reconstruction on weighted average cost of capital. But I'm answering impact on share price and impact on weighted average cost of capital. Ile share price tulipata ngapi? Before the financial reconstruction?
58.56.
Ilikuwa 58.5. Share price before the financial reconstruction, weighted average cost of capital before the financial reconstruction. Now, what happens after the financial reconstruction? You are told the ratio of debt to equity will increase to what?
1.2.
1.2 in the company's capital structure, isn't it?
Yes.
Huh? This is the only
Yes.
variable that has changed, ladies and gentlemen. So how does it affect share price now? Share price after the financial reconstruction, E naught 1 plus G over KEL minus G. Share price share price after the financial reconstruction now. Remember, D naught will not change. That is still 3. But the value of G and the key KEL must change. Now that the ratio has changed, the ratio of debt to equity has changed, then definitely we have to recompute the cost of equity of a levered farm after the financial reconstruction and the growth rate after the financial reconstruction. We bring in capital asset pricing model using CAPM. You will say KEL is equal to risk-free rate plus BEL, expected return of the market portfolio minus risk-free rate. Now,
Yes.
we bring in the Amada model to find the levered equity beta. You bring in the Amada model to find the levered equity beta. So I've said P naught is equal to D naught, 1 plus G, KEL minus G. We know D naught, that is 3. Whether it is before or after the financial reconstruction, that one does not change. The dividend payout is 50%, earning per share is 6. So this one, let the Amada model. I mean, CAPM. KEL is equal to risk-free rate plus BEL. Expected return of the market portfolio minus risk-free rate. This is 8, risk-free rate. Return of the market portfolio, was it 14?
Yes.
That is 8. Now, you bring in the Amada model to find BEL. So BEL is equal to BEU 1 plus P over S 1 minus T. The difference comes here now. After undergoing through the financial reconstruction, the ratio of debt to equity will increase to 1.2, isn't it?
Yes.
Will increase to 1.2. How much was the asset beta? This one does not change. How much was the asset beta?
0.3.
Here only constant. How much is the ratio of debt to equity? 1.2.
1.2.
Now hii ingine ni 0.3. Therefore, what becomes the levered equity beta now?
0.85.
1 plus 1.2, 1 minus 0.3, which is equal to?
0.85.
That is the levered equity beta, isn't it? The levered equity beta after the financial reconstruction. Now you go to CAPM, risk-free rate is 8 plus 0.85, close the bracket, 14 minus 8. Cost of equity becomes what? Cost of equity of a levered farm after the financial reconstruction. So you need to be very careful here, because that financial reconstruction only affects. This is where there's a difference. The 1.2 ratio of debt to equity. Cost of equity.
13.1.
Huh?
13.1.
Yes, 13.1%. The cost of equity of a levered farm after the financial reconstruction. Now, we can then again look for the value of G, return on equity times retention ratio. We made an assumption that return on equity is equal to cost of equity. So we know the cost of equity is 13.1%. Retention ratio is 50%. Dividend payout is 50%, which means retention ratio is 50%. Now that we know the cost of equity of a levered farm before the financial reconstruction, 13.1%, it's assumed that return on equity is equal to cost of equity in this context, in this question. So growth rate becomes what?
Right.
13.1% times 0.5 retention ratio.
6.6.
Yes. So growth rate is 6.6%. And therefore, what becomes the price now? Share price after the financial reconstruction? That is 3. 1 plus 6.6%. Cost of equity, we have found what? 13.1, eh? Using CAPM minus 6.6. D naught is a constant. Growth rate is what we have worked out using the Gordon's growth approximation model, 6.6, divided by 13.1 minus 6.6. The share price becomes what? What becomes the share price now after the financial reconstruction?
49.2.
49.2. Now, before the financial reconstruction, what was the share price?
58.56.
So it looks like the effect of the financial reconstruction on share price is the price will come down, isn't it? The price will come down from 58 point something to 49.2, which is what percentage reduction? Which is what percentage reduction? That price was 58 to 49, eh? What percentage reduction?
15.98.
Yes. Now, is it possible for us to know the weighted average cost of capital after the financial reconstruction? Is it possible to establish the weighted average cost of capital of the firm after the financial reconstruction? Weighted average cost of capital of a levered firm after the financial reconstruction, KEL, S over VL plus KD, 1 minus T, B over V. Of course, we are assuming two items in the firm's capital structure. After the financial reconstruction, we used CAPM to find the cost of equity of a levered firm. 13.1? Sio tumetumia CAPM, eh? Sindio? Ama tumepata ngapi? Hiyo KEL?
13.1.
Yes, that is risk-free. KD is equal to risk-free rate of return. Corporation tax rate, 30%. Now, the ratio of debt to equity after financial reconstruction is 1.2. So what becomes the proportion of equity in this capital structure? And what's the proportion of debt in this firm's capital structure? You can simply say B to S is 1.2 to 1. So what is the proportion of debt? 1.2 to 2.2. Proportion of equity? 1 divided by 2.2, eh? The ratio of debt to equity is 1.2 to 1. Therefore, debt is 1.2 divided by 2.2, which is 0.what?
55.
Debt. What is the proportion of equity? 1 divided by 2.2.
0.45.
0.45. So what becomes now the overall cost of capital of the firm? Weighted average cost of capital after the financial reconstruction now? Take 13.1 times 0.45 plus 8 times 0.7 times 0.55. The weighted average cost of capital of the company after the financial reconstruction becomes inakuwa ngapi sasa? Unachukua 13.1 times 0.45 plus 8 times 0.7 times 0.55.
8.97.
8.97%. Eh? What was the overall cost of capital before the financial reconstruction?
8.5.
8.5. So what effect has the financial reconstruction had on overall cost of capital? It has gone up, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, the weighted average cost of capital of the farm has gone up from 8.5 to 8.97%. Eh? Now, I shared with you your solution. Mnaiona, eh? Mnaiona wenzangu?
Yes.
Mnaiona? I
Yes.
have analyzed the impact of the financial reconstruction of the farm share price and overall cost of capital. Working number one, share price and weighted average cost of capital before the financial reconstruction. Sasa mnaona hiyo formula. P naught is D naught 1 plus G, KSL minus G. Then D naught, the dividend payout was 50% times 6, that is 3. Sasa nilitoa KPM, nileta KPM. Using the capital asset price model, find cost of equity over levered farm. Cost of equity over levered farm before the financial reconstruction. BL is equity beta over levered farm before the financial reconstruction using the Amada model. Naona hiyo Amada, nilileta hiyo Amada, nikasema BL is 0.3 in bracket 1 plus 0.8 times 0.7. Tumepata hiyo 0.468. Then you bring it to the capital asset price model, find the cost of equity of a levered farm. We found 10.81%. Then, using the Gordon's growth approximation equation, G is equal to return on equity times retention ratio. I have made an assumption that return on equity is equal to cost of equity. So you tumepata 10.81%. Return on equity is assumed to be the same as cost of equity. So the growth rate, if you take return on equity times retention ratio, 5.41%. Share price, tulipata 58.6 shillings.
Yes.
Yes, mnaona ndio tumepata. Then I move further to establish the weighted average cost of capital of a levered farm. I've shown you how we arrived at that. The answer was coming to 8.5%. Si ni kweli?
Yes.
Kufika hapo, that is before the financial reconstruction. Now, you proceed. Working number 2, share price and the weighted average cost of capital of a levered farm after the financial reconstruction again. The same process. What has changed is the ratio of debt to equity. Nothing has changed. Formula ndio hiyo, unaleta KPM, utafuta cost of equity. You see the ratio of debt to equity, that's what has only changed to 1.2. So asset beta 0.8, 1 plus 1.2 times 0.7, beta of a levered farm after the financial reconstruction 0.55. We go to the capital asset price model to find the cost of equity of a levered farm. Hala? Was it 11.3 or 13? Mulinipatia gani nyinyi? Hii cost of equity, was it 13 or 11.3? Was there an error in what we did earlier?
There was an error under beta of a levered farm.
Huh? There's an error where?
Beta tulipata 0.85 inafaa kuwa 0.55.
Nyinyi mulipata ingine?
Yeah, tulipata different, but
0.55.
let's look at the other one.
So surely, are you really doing me a good service? Okay, fine. So levered beta is 0.55. Kienda kwa hiyo formula, cost of equity of a levered farm therefore should be 11.31, not 13. Then we have assumed return on equity is equal to cost of equity. Don't assume in the future unless you have no information to look for return on equity. Sawa sawa? Please don't assume if you know net income and you know equity. Don't assume. If you know net income and you know equity, work out return on equity. In the absence of that information, we assume return on equity is equal to cost of equity. So growth rate is 11.31% times retention ratio, that is 5.7%. Eh? So if you go to the Gordon's growth model, we can find the share price. P naught is equal to 3, 1 plus 5.7% divided by 11.31% minus 5.7%. That share price is 56.52. Iko sawa? 56.52. So what has happened to the share price now? It has come down from it has come down from 58.56 to
8.5.
what percentage reduction? You are capable of working out a percentage reduction, isn't it? Now, how about weighted average cost of capital after the financial reconstruction? Unaleta your formula. Cost of equity tumetafuta using CAPM. Debt is risk-free. Tax rate we know. Proportions nimewaonyesha vile tunapata. The ratio of debt to equity is 1.2 to 1. Debt to equity is 1.2 to 1, meaning debt should be 1.2 over 2.2, and equity is 1 over 2.2. The answer is 8.23%. Eh? Sinisawa wenzangu? So what has happened to the overall cost of capital? It has come down from the weighted average cost of capital has reduced from
8.5.
before the financial reconstruction, 8.5 to what? To 8.23%. Eh? What percentage reduction is that?
0.
We reduce by 3.5%. Eh? Oh, share price will reduce by 3.5%. The overall cost of capital will reduce from 8.52 to 8.23, which is 3.4% reduction. Eh? Hiyo iko sawa? Hiyo si iko sawa wenzangu?
0.3%.